Great news for your fantasy team. Teddy wins. Teddy won the job. What does this mean for the fantasy team? We're not talking about Broncos' chances of playoffs. We're not talking about their future. We're not talking about me as a Bronco fan. We're talking about what does this mean for fantasy. And first, let's compare what we thought this was going to be with Drew Lock compared to Teddy Bridgewater. And when we look at every single metric, really, in reality, in these advanced metrics, we look at the completion percentage clearly goes to Teddy Bridgewater in kind of a landslide. Touchdowns, those are a draw. Drew, despite the fact of having that idea of being a gunslinger, still fell short in the touchdown department last year. His touchdown per game clip was slightly higher, but in reality, it was pretty much a draw. And then when you look at the air yards per game, that goes to Drew, but just slightly. And in reality, Teddy Bridgewater was trying to push the ball downfield last year at 7.3 yards per clip. His completion was at 5.5 and Drew's was at 6.0, so there was a little bit of a jump there. But when you look at the completion percentage, you clearly would rather have more completions with a half a yard less per completion than you would the slightly more upside. So I don't know if there was as much upside as what people thought with Drew Lock over Teddy Bridgewater, at least at this point in Drew's career. So you look at the on-target throws, that goes to Teddy. Yards per game, that goes to Teddy. Wide receivers with fantasy success, this goes to Teddy as well. When you look at what he did with Michael Thomas in New Orleans, when you look at what he did last year, he had a back-end wide receiver 2, a couple wide receiver 3s in this offense. Like, he was okay for fantasy purposes last year. And when we look at the assets in Denver, we're looking at what I think better assets. And this is a guy that he's twice in his career had top 10 longest pass play in league for the year. He's had 2 times in his career where he's had top 10 completion percentages in the league. This guy is efficient and going to be good for guys like Jerry Jeudy, who struggled in their rookie season and until this point have been great deals. But now Jerry Jeudy is surging up the board, and when we compare him, he is very comparable to a guy like DJ Moore. I just think that you're just getting a better player in Jerry Jeudy, and I think you see a guy in Teddy Bridgewater who thinks that as well. He's talking about this guy as though he doesn't have ACLs in his knees when he's talking with Mike Kliss from Channel 9 News there in Denver. We're talking about a guy that had back-to-back 30-yard receptions in these first 2 preseason games. And so Jerry Jeudy, a playmaker, a guy who's going to run with the ball after the catch, which is good for Teddy because he's going to get Jerry Jeudy the ball in open spaces because Jerry Jeudy gets open, and that's going to be good for him. So when we're comparing these two guys, DJ Moore had a really good season last year. It was just a couple touchdowns short from being a really, really good season for you. But the yards were there, the catches were there. He just fell short on the touchdown mark. And I think that Teddy can bring those touchdowns up this year. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, we talk about a little bit some of the other comparisons on this team. The wide receiver 2 compared to the wide receiver 2 for Carolina last year. That was Robbie Anderson, guys. And Robbie Anderson was a deep threat in New York. And last year, those deep targets plummeted. His yards per reception were only just over 10 yards per reception last year. And you look at what's the comparable wide receiver 2 right now, that's kind of a battle between, you know, is it going to be Cortland Sutton? Is it going to be KJ Hamler? I know Cortland Sutton is the guy, but who works best with what Teddy does? And I know that KJ Hamler is the speed guy that takes the top off, but he runs routes well. And you saw that connection with KJ Hamler in the preseason with Teddy Bridgewater. on that little short touchdown pass. Just he's on the radar. He's not just a deep threat in this offense, especially with Teddy. And I know that Teddy can throw the ball more than 20 yards, but when you look at his completion percentage throughout his career, it's just more accurate under the 20-yard pass range. And it gets less and less accurate over that. And I know that's for most quarterbacks, but it's a drastic drop-off. So you're going to see these guys being more utilized in those underneath routes, which is okay. That's going to be good for a guy like Noah Fant, who's going to be probably the third option in the receiving game this year. And I know this is a really muddled receiving core. You're trying to figure out who's going to be that second wide receiver, but I truly believe Noah Fant is probably going to be the third targeted receiver in this offense. He's going to be that short area target that's good at making explosive plays. You can compare him to that third receiver last year for Carolina, that Curtis Samuel role, who took a lot of short area targets and made them into big plays. And he also made big plays as the gadget guy. And I know that's not what Noah Fant is, but he's going to be the number 3 receiver in this offense, and he's got comparable stats when you look at targets last year for Curtis Samuel, targets last year for Noah Fant. The thing is, Curtis Samuel just caught more of them, and I think this year Fant will catch more, and that is the upside that Teddy Bridgewater is going to bring with this offense. And then we think about the fourth kind of area of the receiving game, those other short area targets, the dump off passes to our running backs, and that's going to be Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams. Are these guys going to be good? And I think you're going to get a running back 2 out of this backfield. I think you're going to get a flex out of this backfield. I think both of them are going to get work. Mike Davis last year got 70 targets from Teddy Bridgewater. I think Melvin Gordon is a good guy in the receiving game. Is he elite? Is he Austin Eckler? No, but he is a guy that is truly competent in the passing game, and he's a guy that makes plays once he gets in the open field. And so he will be utilized that way. Javonte Williams, I believe they will utilize him that way as well. And so you're talking about guys that are going to get, 35, 40 targets, 50 targets. Maybe one of them will get 30 targets depending on how they break this up. Whether Javonte Williams ends up overtaking Melvin Gordon, that's a different discussion. The fact is, these guys are going to be utilized in the passing game by Teddy Bridgewater. And when you look in that Seattle game, in preseason, Teddy did such a great job of manipulating the pocket, working around the pocket, and this is another thing that he does better than Drew Lock. Drew Lock is more apt to abandon the play, where Teddy will hang in there and he'll let the receivers find a way to get open. And if not, he found a Royce Freeman, and Royce was able to take it up and get the first down. So this is a guy that is going to go through his progressions, and if it's not there, he's going to dump it off to his running back. And that's great news for all of basically the fantasy assets. I'm more the one asset I am most worried about in this whole wide receiving core is Courtland Sutton. And he is probably, part of it is the ACL tear. Part of it is the fact that he's more of a 50-50 guy. And I think he thrived in that role with Drew Lock. And that's not going to be as much of a role with Teddy Bridgewater. And I just could see him being overtaken by a guy like KJ Hamler. Is it the case? No, I still think he's listed as the wide receiver 2 on this offense, but I think, like I said, KJ fits what Teddy likes to do more. But Jerry Jeudy, to me, right now, is a really high-end wide receiver 3 that I think could legitimately finish this season with 80 receptions, 1,200 yards, 7-8 touchdowns, and you're really happy with where you got him. So what do we have to do to get the most out of these players? And we got to look at what Teddy did in this 5-game sample size in New Orleans in 2019. And what does that project to out to 17 games? I know it's a stretch, taking 5 games, stretching out to 17. It's too small of a sample size, but we do have this sample size from Teddy when he was with a good team, solid defense, amazing offensive talent with good play calling. I think the play calling is going to be better in Denver. I think that was part of his hindrance, part of what was the problem last year in Carolina. Matt Rule still trying to find his way in the NFL, doesn't necessarily know how to run a practice in the NFL, how to call plays in the NFL, and I think that hurt Teddy. And if you want to say, hey, maybe we can get 2019 Teddy, and I'm thinking Pat Shermer maybe looked at Teddy a couple times in the preseason against these 2s and 3s, but he went back and looked at these games that Teddy was in 2019, and he goes, you know what? He was doing the same thing against 1s in games that mattered when Drew Brees wasn't able to play, and he projects to 30 touchdowns, 4,650 yards, and only 7 interceptions in a 17-game season in that 5-game sample size. That's 356 points. That's 20 points per game. That's QB 11. Now, granted, I'm not drafting this guy for fantasy. I think in 2 QB leagues, I'm totally happy with that. 1 QB league, I'm not drafting. But I'm saying those numbers mean he made everybody else on this team better. 30 touchdowns divided by all of these guys, that's twice the touchdowns that they had last year, basically, in Denver. That's a lot more points rolling around the Denver Broncos wide receiver core. The yards are almost twice as much. That's a lot more points rolling around. You're going to have more catches. This wide receiving core is up and coming, and I want to buy them right now while they're still viewed as a low-end target. Final verdict, upgrade for Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy's upgraded. KJ Hamler, I'm going to say that's kind of a wash. I really do think that some of the things KJ did and does really helped what Drew Lock wanted to do. But I think he's going to get targets, and I do think he's going to be involved. A slight downgrade for Cortland Sutton. He's still the second wide receiver I want to own out of this offense. And then Noah Fant definitely being drafted right around the right area. I think he's got top 6 upside. And he's still going to be a top 12 tight end at the end of the season. And these running backs definitely have value. You just don't know which one is going to be the guy by the end of the season.